Hello, hello! I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write, where I give questionable writing advice through running metaphors. I've had a few serious episodes recently, so tonight is not. This is going to be all about something that's becoming more and more prevalent, that is the reboots, remakes, and retellings. There's an old adage that there are no new stories being told. Unfortunately, if you look at the past several years of blockbusters, that's proving to be true. For every groundbreaking and inspirational concept that brings on a diverse cast, a new mindset, a new theme, plot, whatever, there are dozens, if not hundreds, that walk down a path someone has done before them. What is a reboot versus a remake versus a retelling? The distinctions are nuanced. Overall, these are new ways of telling familiar stories as publishers and studios chase brand recognition and money. For a near flawless explanation, listen to Jason Lee's self-referential monologue in Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, which as a movie has a surprisingly large amount of heart and care put into it. Assuming you didn't watch that, reboots take an existing story, plot, and characters and drop it into something new. By rebooting James Bond, the actor can be replaced and never has to significantly age or change or grow as a person, as they're dropped into the next spy thriller. Remakes do the same thing, but they tend to tell the same story. In this way, the latest version of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe movie was a remake of the classic 80s made-for-TV broadcast based on the book. Unfortunately, writers and studios who don't want to deal with deep lore wipe the slate clean to tell whatever story they want. This leads to contradictory canon and incomprehensible timelines. When they really want to give a middle finger to fans, they'll include cameos, subtle nods, and references to the previous and likely better continuity without being burdened by it. That makes the movie, show, or book feel like a cash grab. Too many classics are getting rebooted or remade that should remain untouched. Retellings can be more interesting. They put a modern spin on classics or apply a new lens to a well-known story. Numerous authors are retelling Disney movies from the villain's point of view in order to humanize them. A lot of these current retellings start off as fanfiction for the author's favorite books or movies. E.L. James, the author of 50 Shades of Grey, has stated that her series' roots were based on fanfic for Twilight, making it in some ways a retelling of that story. Based on the number of similarities, Harry Potter could be thought of as a retelling of Star Wars, which is in turn a retelling of the classic hero's journey. There are plenty of retellings, fanfic or otherwise, which take these beloved stories and apply them to something new, such as steampunk. Here's my 5 and 5 list of fantastic and terrible reboots, remakes, and retellings. Starting off with the good number 1, The Count of Monte Cristo. As far as I'm concerned, the 2003 version of the Count of Monte Cristo movie starring Guy Pearce should be the gold standard for reboots/remakes. Alexander Dumas's classic revenge story has been told and retold across numerous formats, including multiple movies and plays, and even being immortalized in anime. In the film's mere 2-hour and 11-minute runtime, it funnels a complex story into a simple, emotional adventure. That alone is a feat. Yet this movie also outright stated details which are only hinted at in the book, while skipping over the cascading plot threads to tell a more focused story. If you haven't already, go watch this movie or read the book. Number 2, Batman Begins. This did away with the campy, over-the-top ice puns in favor of gritty realism that has since reshaped the past 2 decades of film. The grounded reboot with its realistic take has expanded beyond superhero movies to incorporate darker tones in dramas, action movies, and even comedies. Thanks to Batnips, Batass, and a Bat credit card, the property long thought to be destroyed, at least as far as the movies were concerned, was reinvigorated for a complete trilogy. Batman Begins was such a strong reboot that its sequel, The Dark Knight, earned an Oscar based on Heath Ledger's incredible performance. If you want to remember a masterclass on showing and not telling, then go ahead and watch Batman Begins. And then go watch The Dark Knight. Number 3, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The latest remake of this movie carried much of the wonder from the original book and brought it to a larger audience. While the 80s made-for-TV broadcast was limited by the technology and some dated Shakespearean acting, The latest iteration thrives on the CGI and its beautiful fantasy setting. Number 4, She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. This was an emotional ride that ensured my wife and I renewed our Netflix account. I enjoyed this series with its diverse cast and strong female leads, which was further aided by the high quality of story that it told. I thrived on the gripping adventure of redemption and bravery, and appreciated the diverse races and genders of those both on and off the screen who brought this series to life. The reboot of She-Ra transformed a goofy toy-based 80s cartoon into one of these standout shows amid 2+ years of excessive TV watching. Although I had no attachments to the original or the source material, it proved to be a surprise hit. It grew to have considerable depth and built to a close that left my wife in tears. Number 5, Spider-Man. Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man Homecoming are two excellent reboots / remakes / retellings of my favorite superhero. To me, a scientist who is struggling to do the right thing, at least in his mind, even at the cost of his future and relationships, is a core concept I can relate to and sympathize with. His quips are unique to the point where in the comics, after getting mind swapped and swapping back into his body, as one does, his rogues gallery knew it was him based on how badly he annoyed them during a fight. Also, until Into the Spider-Verse and Homecoming, my wife never really got why I liked Spider-Man so much. She never watched the 90s show, and her most prolific comment about the Sam Raimi Spider Universe is that Peter Parker was too whiny. I'm not going to go into why neither of us like the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies, except to say that I'm engaged by good storytelling and repelled by the opposite. All that to say, Into the Spider-Verse and Homecoming told such interesting stories with relatable heroes that they brought my wife around to liking Spider-Man. And now for the bad. Number 1, Spider-Man. This is a controversial take. I thought Spider-Man No Way Home was not a good story. I absolutely enjoyed it, but this remake of the One More Day storyline hinged on the groundwork of 2 previous Spider-Man universes without doing much on its own. There is not enough time to break down everything I didn't like, so I'll summarize it as best I can as quickly as I can. Tom Holland's Peter Parker / Spider-Man has no reason to act except for the fact that he is a hero. He needs to help the villains because that's what heroes do. The villains introduced have connections to the fans of the previous Spider-Man universes as well as to the later Spider-Man who show up. However, Tom Holland's Spider-Man has no emotional attachment to these strangers until one forces him to react in a way I'm not going to spoil here. The movie moves at a frantic pace to cram as much nostalgia down my throat without doing enough to stand on the merits of its own. That is a larger and growing problem within the Marvel movie universe. All in all, I hope the writers and everyone involved will course correct to tell a Tom Holland Spider-Man story in the next film, rather than rely on the past 20 years of Spider-Man movies to do the emotional lifting. That being said, this was monumentally more emotional and better written than the source material of One More Day. Long story short, superheroes cannot be happily married, so they broke up Mary Jane and Peter Parker by rewriting their history due to a deal with Mephisto to save Aunt May's life. Semi-recent comics proved how short-sighted that decision was, as there was a miniseries based around Mary Jane and Peter Parker being happily married and having a kid named May. That series was fantastic, and I was thoroughly disappointed when it got canceled. Number 2, Star Wars, episodes 7 through 9. Yes, I'm biased on this one. Some of the best books I read delved into the Star Wars canon in a post-Return of the Jedi era. Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire trilogy has enough lore alone to be made into 3 thrilling movies. They could have further adapted the story to include an aged-up Luke, Han, and Leia, as well as incorporate dynamic Finn and Rey characters. Except the studio took the easy way out and scrapped all canon, preferring to remake Star Wars A New Hope as Episode 7. Worse, the rotating writers and directors contradicted plotlines and themes established in each of the iterative movies to create a disjointed series that sputtered to an incoherent conclusion. Number 3, The Mummy. Following the Marvel Universe's billion-dollar successes, every studio tried to big bang their own new universe without first creating worthwhile stories or individual characters we cared about. Basically, everyone involved learned the wrong lessons from the MCU. Enter Universal's The Mummy. Not the fun, lighthearted Brendan Fraser spectacles which channeled Indiana Jones in the early 2000s. No, this was a corpse drained of its blood, and any sense of plot or character development was removed and jarred, as though the movie itself were being mummified. It lacked everything which made the original stand out. Not surprisingly, the dark universe of Universal's monster mashup is dead and hopefully never coming back. That is, unless somebody opened up an ancient tomb to unleash its curse upon us in the decade-long years we've had since 2020. Number 4, Michael Bay. This may seem unfair, but every reboot Michael Bay has touched has turned into a steaming trash heap. The beloved Transformers? Those movies are unwatchable. To my eternal shame, I went to go see the first 2 Bay Transformer movies in the theater. I had assumed he learned his lesson from the first movie to not make something so offensively bad in the second. Well, I was wrong. I have no excuse for watching the third movie, short of the fact that I was bored and it was on TV. I paid no money to see it and I still felt ripped off. The movies worked up to such unnecessarily large set pieces where it is impossible to tell who is doing what to whom to protect a MacGuffin with properties that change according to plot needs. It doesn't help that these CGI robots and actors carry no emotional weight. I could dig at the Michael Bay Transformer movies in isolation, yet compared to any other Transformer series or movie, they are relatively abysmal. Sure, the 80s Transformer movie is flawed, but it is immensely more entertaining and coherent than any Michael Bay movie. Likewise, the 2007 3D animated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie had plot, motives, and arcs for the characters to develop and grow. All that was missing from Michael Bay's 2014 and 2016 TMNT reboots. Honestly, the Michael Bay TMNT reboots are not worth me taking the time to tear down. To quote the 2004 song from Team America, how does Michael Bay get to keep on making movies? His success should bring hope to any writer who feels that they're missing the basics like plot or character development. And lastly, number 5, Reboot. I love the original groundbreaking show called Reboot. It followed the lives of computer components as they fought against viruses and bugs. Every episode was chock full of humor and references which went way over my head as a kid. The voice acting was better than it had any right to be for a kids show, and the 3D animation, though dated by today's standards, was the best of CGI for the time. Episodes popped and the weekly stories told were unique. Not to mention that the long arcs of the later seasons can bring a tear to my eye for how emotionally invested I got in those characters, especially during the, spoiler alert, reboot. Then there's the rebootquel of Reboot, which attempted to act as a reboot of the original context, while also acting as a sequel continuation. By betraying what made the original shine so brightly, it was, in every sense of the word, an utter disappointment and cash grab. Even though the original ended on a cliffhanger, I would have preferred no reboot of Reboot to whatever you want to call the reboot of Reboot we got. Also, fun fact, that cliffhanger was resolved in comic form, so if you're a fan of the original series, you should check that out. There you have it, 5 stellar reboots, remakes, and retellings, and 5 baddies. I watched and read it all, so you don't have to. Now you can make an educated choice in how to spend your time in reading or watching these reference works. That being said, it is time for me to dust off my DVD of the Count of Monte Cristo and search the bowels of the internet for all the seasons of the original Reboot. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write. If you enjoyed my opinions on reboots, remakes, and retellings, then please press those like and subscribe buttons. Let me know in those comments if you have your own favorite reboot. Do you agree with my opinions, or is everything I said wrong? I post my running and writing progress on Instagram and Twitter as Running to Write, so be sure to follow me and join in with your own thoughts. Don't forget to sign up for the Running to Write monthly newsletter for updates on my assorted musings, pitfalls, and lessons learned. I'll also include relevant milestones in running and writing. See you next time. Until then, think about how you might write a reboot, remake, or retelling of your favorite story.